I am the pastor.
I am the prince.
And welcome to another edition of the Pastor
and the Prince
podcast. And you know what? God has been good to us. Prince, God has been good. Whoa! Because we were able to secure the services of our friend, Dr. Arnold James. And you know what? This is what we're going to do. We've had, for those of you that were able to catch the previous podcast, we thank you for listening. And we shared with you that we were going to come back. And this time we're going to just allow you to listen in to our discussion with Dr. James. We had a rich discussion after the previous podcast. Absolutely. And we went over so many things, and Lyle was saying we should have recorded that. Dr. James had agreed, yes, we should have recorded that. And what we're going to do is just invite you into a conversation that we were having. Now, I'm just going to have to put a disclaimer out there right away. We're not going to do a word of the week or anything like that, but I have to put out this disclaimer. Some of us that are in the United States, we're dealing with this thing that everyone refers to as grief. Is it okay if I just talk about it for just a moment? Some of us that are listening.
Can I interrupt you just 1 second?
Yeah.
Before we do that, I do want to give our listeners an open invitation to respond. And even if you want to send information to us that we can forward to Dr. James, your feedback, your wonderful comments about it, even your own stories, email us podcast@yahogo.org, podcast@yahogo.org. Okay.
Or
let us hear from you.
Yeah. Or if you would like to maybe schedule some time with the doctor, he may be interested in, chatting with you. I don't know if he's offering services outside of New Orleans, but I'm sure he can place you with someone that's in your region that can help you with some of these serious things that we're talking about. And I'm going to go back to what many of us have been dealing with over the past 2 years, and that is the loss of our loved ones, whether it's through COVID, whether it's through cancer, whether it's through heart attacks. Some of us have been, if I can use the term, taking it on the chin. We've been, dealing with this loss. And that was a discussion that we had, during our last podcast. We had talked about grief, and, Dr. James was sharing with us we didn't talk about the stages of grief, but we talked about some of the components with grief that you may not hear in contemporary.
And he called it complicated grief. And that's what I want to continue to talk about, because you dealt with how grief is not just
it's not linear or one-dimensional.
No,
correct.
It's not one-dimensional at all. Dr. James, would you like to elaborate on that for us?
I think that's one of the important things we talk about. People can look up the stages of grief online if they will. We're not going to enumerate those here. But one of the things to understand, and people miss this part of the stages of grief, is that it is not linear, and some of them are actually repeated before they are resolved. And there used to be, I think it was 5 stages of grief, but they've added a couple more now. And those couple more that they have added is finding a meaning inside of the life and the loss. And that searching for meaning, it doesn't just sit with you, but it kind of compels you to a level of understanding and get, to fortify and support the acceptance. If I remember this person as this way, they contributed this when they were here. These are the memories, and these are the things I will continue to do in their honor. You've made meaning. And so when we talk about loss, when we start talking about loss, in COVID, we're talking about death, but we also have to talk about the interruption and the loss of a way of life.
That's true.
There are people who lost jobs. There are people who lost their work community because they had to work from home. There were people who did not finish senior years in high school and go to prom and go to graduation the way it had been anticipated. Correct. And when all those things have been disrupted, there is a sense of loss. The response to loss is sadness. Depending on your ability to of resilience. Some people bounced back from that and moved on. Some people did not bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became a problem and might have spiraled into, what is wrong with me? These things are happening to me, that ended up in some sort of depression.
So you're saying that a sadness can have the ability to tilt you toward depression? I'm not saying that sadness equals depression.
Not equal to, but sets the stage.
It sets the stage for. I like that
because
one better.
We think of our emotions and our flexibility and adaptability inside of our emotion is to be able to, when the event occurs, we move in, we move out. We move in, we move out. We move in, we move out. Some people move in, don't move out.
Wow.
Oh.
Yeah. You know,
like
it's really interesting that you described some of those, because I never would have thought an empty nest syndrome would have created that. But the way you describe it, there are many things that can fall in that category. Like I told you, my grandmother used to always say, and you knew my grandmother, Gloria Flott Boswell Miles. She used to always say that divorce could be looked at as death, you know, could be looked at as a major loss.
Because it is a loss of a relationship.
Yeah.
You know, when we think about death, it's not just the loss of a person and their, you know, their life, but loss of relationship, loss of opportunity, sometimes the loss of aspects of ourselves. I saw myself as an independent breadwinner. Now I'm disabled. I can't do that. My identity shifts.
Yes.
When my identity shifts, that is a loss, and I have to grieve the loss of my strong and healthy self to the acceptance of my disabled, whatever, adaptable self, whatever I'm going to become. Correct. You know, the moving from retirement is a loss. It's a loss of a career.
That's a major
How is
change.
that managed?
So Dr. James, are you telling us that any major shift in life, almost like a tectonic plate, it's almost like you're definitely having some type of, you know, earthquake or something emotionally happening, and the results of that is, well, whatever happens after this major event, it can either go this way or that way. Can you give us some more on that? You were about to say some more on that.
One of the books I read over and this is not a promotion for anybody's stuff, but there's a book that Oprah wrote along with Dr. Fred Perry called What Happened to You? And when things are happening in the world, these tectonic shifts, I love this because sometimes they are tectonic shifts. And if you don't know what that is, that's when the earth moves and the waves change. But those of you who like geology, that means it's been seismic and major.
That's it. It's major, not minor. This is major.
Right.
And
that's
so when those things happen, our default is usually, what's wrong with me? I can't get through this. What's wrong with me? I feel this way. And I want us to change this conversation from, there's nothing wrong with you. You human.
You're hold on.
Nothing happened to you.
Doctor, I got to pause you there. Pause. Are you saying that comes with the planet?
We human. We feel stuff.
Yes, we do.
We change.
Absolutely.
You know, I said in the last podcast, we have these psychological factors that will determine whether we're successful or not so successful at life. And being flexible and adapting are some of the major ones. Because if not for adaptation and flexibility and understanding what's going on around us, we're going to go the way of the dinosaurs.
That is true.
Man.
And I think, are you saying when you use the term adaptation, because it sounds as if during the last podcast, it sounds as if what's happening with technology, we've allowed ourselves to adapt to it versus allowing ourselves to continue to kind of critically think and to use our minds and to adapt to something that's supposed to be here to help us, but it feels as if it's becoming a hindrance to us more so than a help, because now it has us going after more things than things that may...
Processing and analyzing. And in a good church, we would say amen to that.
Well, no, I wanted you to talk. He said in the good church. I want you to talk to that, because it feels as if we're in an era now, and I said error, but we're in an era where we feel as if, well, I don't need to know mama's number because it's in my phone, but we don't realize that memorizing that number forces us to use activities in the brain.
Exactly.
And in a different show, and this was in our podcast show, we said, you know, we learned, and Lyle can speak more to this, but
that show is coming up. We're going to talk about it.
Yes. If you don't use certain muscles, those muscles don't develop. So can you tell us about either the emotional there, or psychological, or things, you know, that we're not using? You know, if a seismic shift occurred, well, yeah, you're not prepared because you never used it.
And it's just like your physical muscle, there's your mental, emotional brain muscle. If you're not using it, then it will, you don't have access to it. And what we're talking about is the development of critical thinking skills, the ability to problem solve. You look at the state of the world, if we rely on what somebody tells us, what some of these computer programs give us in 30 seconds, and we didn't read it for ourselves, then we're spewing this instant knowledge that's been regurgitated from someone else that we are just passing it on, and there may be no fact in any of it. And they say, well, what are facts? Facts are the things that are incontrovertible. You can't dispute them. That's just what it is.
Things that are
true. But if somebody has taken that and made it something else, and you followed the something else, then you don't even know what the true truth is.
And in my church, we would say amen.
Amen.
Accept it.
Lyle, you're about to say, Prince, you're gonna.
Well, I think we should pause and give Dr. James a little water break.
All right, so
we'll be back,
friends and family.
After this,
we'll be back after this.
Talk about a few other things. Yep.
And we're back.
He is the pastor.
He is the prince, and our special guest is
overwhelmed.
Dr. Arnold James.
Licensed clinical psychologist.
Licensed
of over 30
clinical
years.
psychologist.
So we are really blessed to have him.
We
here
are
with
blessed.
us today.
We're overwhelmed. He has been sharing gems. And can I say something that I hear repeated in the church? This has been a very rich conversation. I'm feeling very wealthy right now.
Absolutely.
I don't feel poor anymore because I'm hanging out with wealthy people. And the wealth is something more than what money could ever buy.
Amen. That's all we can say to that. Amen. Amen. I want to jump back into this conversation.
Yes, let's do it.
I do. Before we took the break, you were talking about, you were still talking about complicated grief and that wonderful book that I'm going to check out called What Happened to You. And I do want to talk about the stigma that we have in the Black community, especially among Black males. I'd even mentioned a few scenarios to you, real scenarios that I know, and I know our listeners, and even between the three of us, we probably have at least 10 scenarios that we can mention. I know a young couple who lost a 16-month-old baby, their only child. I know an older couple who lost their son, and this was a preacher who has counseled others and who has, talked to others through grief and, tried to bring them through the journey and so forth. And now they're in a position where they lost their 33-year-old son, and, there's so many different scenarios that we can come up with, especially during COVID. I know one couple who has, been together for over 60 years, and the wife contracted COVID and passed away within a month and a half or so. There are all sorts of losses. And, just you and I, we talked offline about that whole dynamic of what COVID brought to us of not being able to say goodbye, all those things. So that's what I want. I want us to talk about that because I feel like so many of our listeners can relate and it'll resonate with them.
Again, we get back to the executive functioning of the brain. And part of the executive functioning of the brain is to be able to problem solve, to adapt to new situations, to be flexible. But we also have to think about what makes people feel well. What makes people feel well is their sense of control over things around them. And the thing that death does, death destroys your control because you have no control over that.
Can you say that one more time, just for the people in the back? Yes. Just one more time.
I say the thing that makes us feel well is our ability to control things. And so people who want to feel even more well are over controlled.
They're over controlled.
They don't want anything left to chance.
True.
Wow.
And there are some people who have a history of nothing is in my control. They are just aimlessly out there like, well, they just don't seem to care about anything. Maybe they don't care because they have lost a sense of efficacy of what I do matters.
Ooh.
I like
and
that.
And so a lot of that. And so when we start talking about this psychological functioning, it takes a long time and you got to be invested in it for the long haul because your mind is a complicated thing. We're just hitting on bits and pieces and drops in the bucket of what we really need to understand and how this works. And then to make this even more complicated, that each of us, because of who we are and where we come from, are going to experience it differently.
Come on now.
So we cannot have a one-size-fits-all therapy explanation for psychological functioning. It is tailor-made to who you are and what you have experienced. And so as a therapist, I always have to be listening and adapting and adjusting, even in my own therapy. Because I can sit there and look at somebody and I say, well, this person gonna talk about this, and I'll be completely wrong. Every time. So again, what is patience? What is understanding? And getting back to, so if we have an expectation of what is likely to occur when somebody dies and it doesn't turn out that way, we're in a tailspin.
True.
I would love to hold their hand and say goodbye. I would love to be able to have the funeral within 3 or 4 days.
Correct.
I would like to plan
to have everybody
plan.
there at the funeral.
I want to have everybody there to console because all the love and beloved. And what happens when that can't happen? Does that mean all is lost? Well, but because you may not have control over it, you may feel lost.
You may feel lost. And so not only are you sad, you're starting to add to the sad, the thing that you didn't have control over.
And Pastor, when you said, okay, how is this connected to depression? This is how it gets connected to depression. It gets connected to depression because inside of depression is not only the loss, but the sense of helplessness and hopelessness.
So pause right there. Can you express that those are elements that are a part of everyone's makeup and a part of the universe? Can you speak to that?
I would think that those are kind of universal feelings. Helpless, to be, because we as a people, we like to think life is about hope for the next moment, the next day, the next week. We are hopeful that we will be there. So we plan for that.
We plan.
So sometimes we may be helpless of how we get through it, but we're hopeful that it's going to happen.
That's correct.
The morning is going to come.
That is correct.
It is going to come. So if that's the way you're thinking about it, you can feel helpless temporarily because it is mitigated by your hopefulness.
Correct.
You give up if you're feeling helpless and hopeless, then we set the stage for depression. And add to that, from a psychological point of view, we look at from a cognitive point of view, if there's a negative appraisal of the self, the world, and the future, then we say you have the negative cognitive triad for depression.
There you go. And this is where you need to talk to.
And this is when you got to talk to somebody.
To a licensed psychologist. That's when the discussions need to begin. Because what you don't want it to do is to fester over a long period of time, and long for everyone is going to have a different definition. Now, help me out there. Rescue me on that one. Because I've learned just working with people, and I can say working with people with technical support, one person's long may not be another person's long.
Right. You know, for someone who's technologically disadvantaged like me, that if it doesn't show up on the screen, I've hit the button 5 times and I'd have messed up what it was I was supposed to be waiting for.
I'm there with you, Arnold. I'm there with you.
I was sitting with a tech guy one day. He said, "Could you just sit on your hands till we get this done? Because you'd hit the button too many times." Well, I want it to work. I want it to work. And so we get to this concept of patience.
Yeah.
Can we get to that? I say to my patients a lot of time, sometimes in the waiting, we can't be tired in the waiting.
True.
Ooh.
You can't be, because sometimes it's longer than others. And if we are some people who want it immediately and we've not learned to wait and sit and delay our gratification for future satisfactions, then that's going to be problematic in the coping.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's necessary for the coping. So if you've had traumatic life experiences, they have culminated in a sense of despair. You can't say, "I'm going to the therapist and we're going to talk one time and it's done." It's not done.
It's not done.
It's not done.
Ooh.
You have become aware of it. We've heightened awareness, but we've not intervened in the resolution.
So are you saying that they need to be patient with the process?
We got to be now.
You know what? It was interesting that you said that, because I was watching the TV series David Makes Man, and there was in the second season they actually started introducing the fact that he had gone through so much as a child. He had gone through so much going into his manhood that he had a lot to unpack. And I love the fact that it sounds like you're talking directly to our listeners. And I'd like to believe that somebody who's listening right now is hearing you talk as if you're talking directly to them. So, Dr. James, Arnold, my friend, I would like you to speak to that person, that husband or that father or whoever it is that had a loss, whether it be the black male or whoever it is. Talk to them right now and tell them how valuable it is to get these things out of their head and talk to somebody.
You've got to think about whatever you've been through. It's a burden. Trauma can become a burden. That burden then interferes with everything that you do, your relationships, your work, even your physical health. They're showing now that we could have a whole nother talk about the ACEs exam and the adverse childhood experience measure. You can look it up online and see what your ACEs score is. And they say if you've had at least 4 of the 10 traumas that they have identified, you raise your health quota from like 0 to 50-60% of being a smoker and then having a heart attack. Just because of the traumas that existed in your childhood, not what you're experiencing today. So if you compound what has happened in your childhood with what happens in your day-to-day adulthood, that is a lot of stuff to carry around. And let me say this to people, anybody who's listening, I understand that the healthcare community does not engender a lot of people's trust. It changes it's some people get better, some people get worse. It's got racial bias. It's got all kinds of stuff built into it that would keep a person from going. But if your values, and I tell my people all the time, I want you to make value-based decisions, not emotionally-based decisions.
Yes.
Your emotions change from 1 minute to the 1 minute to the next, but your values are what sustains you.
That's correct.
And if you've got a value for love of person, love of other, and quality good health and quality living, you have a responsibility to yourself and everyone that you love to go to the doctor when you're sick and not sick, and to a therapist when you feeling traumatic or not.
Arnold, I love that you said that there's a responsibility to others.
There's
a responsibility to others. And wow, I want to add to that.
That responsibility is your manifestation that you are doing something.
That you're doing something.
You are not helpless.
Yes.
You're not helpless.
And you're actually putting the onus on us, the individual, that we need to go and do this.
Right.
So that it not only helps us, it helps my brother too.
Right.
Even when you need help.
I'm sad, I'm upset. I have a responsibility to say, man, can you sit with me?
Yes.
Wow.
Can you be with me? I don't know why I feel this way. Or if you see your friend and they're not the friend you used to them being, you need to say, are you okay?
Are you okay?
Wow.
Are you okay? I might not be able to help you, but maybe I can help direct you.
There you go. There you have it. As a matter of fact,
Dr. Arnold James,
we're running out of time, I know. I'm going to promise you, we're running out of time.
We're going to have him back again. We're going to have him back
for
again.
a third time.
And you know what? Yeah, listen, with conversations like this, we have to give our audience a chance to breathe and just like take it all in. So we're going to do a couple of episodes after this.
But you know what? How about this? Can we dedicate one to those who are feeling this way? Because what we're trying to curb is this thing that people are thinking is a social norm. And I want to say it's abnormal to say, I want to take my own life.
Right.
That is abnormal for me to say, I have no reason to live. I have no reason to have hope in anything because I've been let down so many times. And for me, I'm slowing it down because it's happening so often around us that it's become normalized. And that's the danger of certain things. Once normalization kicks in,
and desensitized,
we become desensitized.
Desensitized. That's the other word that I wanted to.
And so we have to keep the conversation on. What's the value of life? And that we value life, we respect life, we love life. That everything we do is life-giving and life-promoting.
Life-promoting, yes.
And everything else is secondary.
It's secondary.
Yeah. This has been a rich conversation. Thank you so much, Dr. Arnold James. He is a licensed clinical psychologist of over 30 years, over 3 decades of taking care of patients and allowing us that safe space to be able to talk. And I thank you for giving us this safe space with you today.
Yes, sir.
I don't know about Pastor Tim, but you helped me. You helped me with some things today.
You helped me with some things as well, which is why, Lord willing, we're going to bring you back. And we may bring you back somewhere else, but we'll talk about that offline.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. You've been listening to the podcast. It's called the Pastor and the Prince Podcast. Make sure that you continue to subscribe to the platform that you're listening to it on, and make sure that you join us again. Make sure you email us, podcast@yahogo.org. God bless you. Be well.
God bless. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. James.
Thanks, Dr. James.
My pleasure.